Hi, I'm Lori from HIS-talk. Welcome and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled CPSI Takeover of Healthland, Are You Ready? It's brought to you by HIS-talk. I have a few housekeeping items to make you aware of before we get started. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. You can use GoToWebinar's questions box in the console to submit your questions to our presenters at any time. The presenters will answer your question during Q&A at the end. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation in a follow-up email. The CPSI acquisition of Healthland will impact 1,000 hospitals and long-term care post-acute care facilities. Major EMR HIS takeovers seem to be coming 1 or 2 per year. Hospitals can get burned when the acquirer forces clients into a take-it-or-leave-it situation. HIS-talk is pleased to bring Vince Ciotti and Frank Poggio back with their brutally honest and always humorous opinions about CPSI's takeover of Healthland and what it'll mean. Frank is the founder and president of the Kelson Group, where he focuses on ONC certification and market and product strategy. He has a long history of executive roles in healthcare IT companies like Pharmacy Data Systems, Mediware, Citation Computer Systems, Health Microdata Systems, and the University of Wisconsin Hospital. Vince is the co-founder and principal at HIS Professionals, where he consults with client hospitals on system selections, contract negotiations, and IT assessments. Prior to that, he held leadership roles in vendor organizations like Micro Health Systems, HIS, McAuto, and Shared Medical Systems. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Vince.
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you, everybody, for joining in. Frank and I are going to repeat kind of the approach we took with our last session on Cerner's takeover of Siemens. And hope you folks can see on the slides, I've got some added experience to brag about on Medicare, Part A and Part B for 5 years now. So, Frank, I hope you're catching up with me soon. We're going to cover about 10 major topics. You see them listed here at a high level. And Frank and I are going to bounce back and forth. He'll do the first slide, I'll do the second. Probably interrupt each other very rudely. You folks can't, however, you'll have to type your inquiries to Lori, and then at the very end of the session, we'll be glad to answer any questions. And with that, Frank, I can give you the first slide. Your ball.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Let's first look at some lessons from the past and ask the two big questions right up front. Why did Healthland sell, and why did CPS buy? And it's kind of interesting if we look back at our webinar on Cerner Siemens. It's amazing how these reasons tend to repeat themselves. Healthland selling, of course, there's a company that's been around for quite some time. Its history, as Vince will take you through in a minute, goes way back to Dairyland. But it was a company basically with slow growth and revenue basically not moving perhaps as fast as the private equity firms would like to see it. It was acquired a number of years ago by Francisco Partners, an equity firm, and those folks typically are in the game, if you will, for perhaps 3 years or 5 or maybe worst case 7, and are in it to what they classically refer to as eventually flip the company. And if you're looking at a company like Healthland, low growth, you are in an industry where you have a lot of R&D is necessary, not only from a competitive standpoint, but obviously all the regulatory things that are happening takes continued R&D. So you basically look at the balance sheet and the P&L and the history, and you say, well, if I can get a good price, I'm out of here, and that's more than likely what happened. Why did CPS buy? Second question. Obviously, there's a very large client base, 300 or so hospitals, a number of long-term care facilities. CPSI is a public company, been public for probably close to 10, if not 12 years. Started out as a private company back in the 90s. But if you look at the 80s, it as a public company, essentially you have little or no growth. In a very tough marketplace. The small to mid-sized hospital marketplace is typically categorized as a replacement market. Everybody has all their major systems. The only way you expand your revenues is you sell back into your client base, or you steal a client from somebody else, or you buy another company with a lot of clients. Matter of fact, CPSI stock at the public company came down to 68, roughly 48 today. It actually bumped up a buck or two with the announcement of the acquisition. So you got Wall Street behind the company basically saying you got to find a way to grow. There are a couple of other things going on here. LTC bundled payments is going to cause a lot of heartburn. I'll get further into that later. And of course, if you run some numbers, the price was right. $250 million for roughly 300 hospital installs. If you can flip 50% of those at about $1 million apiece, you've got more than half of your investment back. And there are other ways to generate revenue, which I'll get into later. With that, I'll send it back to Vince.
Thanks, Frank. And I'm going to do a little bit of history myself, going back into another Francisco partner acquisition, just to give you a nice analogy. They bought Quadramet about 10 years ago and helped them fund them acquiring the QCPR, the Computerized Patient Record, EHR, but didn't sell too well. Francisco eventually sold Quadramet to the Constellation software firm in Canada and their in-Harris computer subsidiary. Probably a handsome market. So as Frank says, it's a business world, and it makes sense for Francisco partners to do these kind of deals. On the right-hand side here, both Dairyland and CPSI have an interesting background. Healthland has bought a number of firms over the years, LeBlanc, Kinderman, IHSH, and APS, and then sunset them, trying to force their clients over to their products. Whereas CPSI has never bought a thing for their entire, almost 30-year history. It's just quite a shocker that they're suddenly buying. It kind of shows how the Wall Street market was driving them. And the only other vendors left in that world of not buying anybody are Epic. Judy probably never will, I don't think. And Meditech, only a couple of minor systems. LSS was a physician practice, Lake Superior system that they originally found that funded anyway. And they officially took them over a few years ago, as well as PTCT for home health care. So everybody's in this merger and acquisition game except Epic. And it's a heck of a change from the good old days. Frank, your ball on this next slide.
So what do you if you got some good news, I should say some bad news? You're a Healthland client, you are essentially looking at a replacement over however many the older product supported, and we're going to get into that now. But at the same time, essentially, there is some good news. Vince, you want to hit that keyboard? You now basically have to change systems, but that can be a good thing. You maybe have been running a system for too long. It's a little long in the tooth. Maybe there's been plenty of changes in the industry, which not all vendors can keep up with. So this could be a good opportunity for you to positive change. And we can get into that a little bit later. Vince?
Okay, I'm going to jump into the products, the impact on Healthland's products, because there's four, ironic, just like with Siemens there were four. There's four with Healthland, the oldest classic, they call it, with about 170 hospitals. I'm making a rough estimate. They've been gradually going off onto the newer one called Centric, we'll hit in a second. But it's in red ink because these are the targets. These are the ones that have to convert soon. Healthland themselves is pushing these guys strongly over to Centric, the newer one. Both the financials and the clinicals. And the second older product is APS. It was a shared system down in Texas that Healthland acquired. They converted most of them by now. Of the 100, I doubt if there's 10 or 20 left. Most have been converted to the newer Centric, and some have been stolen by other vendors like CPSI. Centric is number 3 here, and it's fairly modern. Only about 5 years old. It was based on the Claris system that was acquired from AHN. Extremely modern architecture, very solid clinicals, nursing, the EHR, and about 80 meaningful use stage 2 attestations, which is quite a lot. Granted, CPSI is more, but CPSI has a monstrously large client base. And then the safest product of all of Healthland's 4 is the American Health Tech Long-Term Care. That is solid as a rock because it's news for CPSI. They've not been in the long-term care industry before. This is a huge opportunity for them. I'm sure they'll be selling many of them to their critical access client base because so many critical access offer long-term care as part of their community array of systems, if you would. So the older your applications with Healthland, the quicker you're going to have to make a change. The Centric, you've probably got a little more time. We'll get specifics in a second. And American Health Tech, the safest of all. Quite an upside for you guys. Frank, this next one's yours.
Some of the support play essentially is, obviously the big question is how long is the vendor going to be willing to maintain the systems they acquire. And as Vince just pointed out, there's quite a mix in that Healthland business portfolio. So the major drivers as to whether or not a vendor essentially, one of the major drivers is the changes in regulations. And there's a ton of regulatory changes that have happened or been happening. Meaningful use stages 2 and 3 coming up. Talk a little bit more about that later. And maybe even 4, who knows, the feds, depending upon who gets elected or not, could go to a MU4, and you got the whole ACO movement moving ahead. You've got pay for performance, value-based purchasing, bundle payments, which is really grabbing hold here in the last year or two. And there's actually a new thing that came out within the last couple of weeks regarding long-term care, which I'll touch on a little later. And of course, you can always wind up having some kind of Ebola-type crisis, which also requires perhaps a number of systems changes. So how long will the systems be supported? What you hear from the vendor is usually a lot of good positive things, and of course, they're not going to want to get into anything negative, but what's going to drive it is what I refer to as the balancing act of the actual revenue versus the resources that are necessary to keep up, and of course the constant changing regulations. So a CPSI firm essentially is on a day-to-day basis trying to balance all these out. You want to keep supporting these products, but in some cases that decision could be taken away from you by the government, by the competition, and so on. Vince?
A very quick snapshot at the vendor's revenue change over the past 2 years kind of puts CPSI's position in perspective. The colors indicate the good stuff is in green, and boy, it was only Cerner has had high revenue increases from 2013 to 14. 2015 revenue, of course, isn't completed yet. But other than that 17% increase for Cerner, look at the yellow, guys. It's kind of gold because yellow doesn't appear well on a PowerPoint screen. But most vendors in the gold, they're only mild increase, 0 to 5%. And in red were the shockers. A lot of vendors actually dropped in revenue. The biggest, Meditech, kind of shocker. Meditech has grown for 40 years now, started in 1970. 45 years, actually, pardon me. And they dropped about 11% the past year. So it shows you how vendors like, and go down to CPSI, row number 8, only had 2% growth. Kind of had to buy something to get back into a high growth rate like Cerner. And indeed, with Cerner's acquisition of Siemens, they'll probably keep that nice high revenue green growth. And I bet CPSI will too. They have an excellent sales and marketing team, and I'm very bullish on what they're going to do in their near-term future. Frank, yours.
Hey, Vince, just leave that slide up for a second. That CPS,
sure.
2%, it gets back to what I said earlier. 2% growth if you're a hospital or a nursing home, but you think it's wonderful. 2% growth for a public technology company is abysmal, and you need to do something about it. So we can move ahead now to my slide.
Okay.
Some of the reality issues I've already touched on, so I'm not going to repeat them. 3 or 4 systems that you acquire, again, take R&D, the technological hurdles you need to deal with in terms of the platforms that they're on. They're all on a lot of different platforms, languages that they're originally written in. Some go back to a thing called KDOL, which is the old Dairyland language, different databases or file structures. It's very costly and inefficient, and if you're a vendor supporting all of that, it can get very difficult and very expensive. And of course, as I mentioned, changing regulations is one of the biggest cost problem areas. Vince, you want to hit me the keyboard there? Good. And what you're faced with as a vendor, particularly as a public vendor in the public market, investors want to see a payback in 3 to 5 years. So $250 million for Healthland. as I mentioned earlier, if you can flip half that client base at roughly $1 million apiece, you're well on your way to making it happen. But the rest of the money, so to speak, is going to come from reduced overhead. So you'll see cuts in sales and marketing, finance, and HR in the acquisition as it gets played out. You're going to see, no doubt, increased support fees. What vendors try to do is, obviously, they got to make that bottom line. So don't be surprised to start seeing your support fees climb, particularly as the regulations keep changing. You're going to see reduced capital investment in that client base because, again, we're supporting a multitude of different products on a multitude of platforms. We're not going to want to put in MU3 or MU4 or ACO tools or whatever into every package. So you're going to see capital investment diminish as it relates to the acquired product. And you're going to see turnover in sales from the old client base. That's where you're going to make the rest of that $100 or so million. Vince?
Now, who's your alternatives? You 170 people on Classic and 10 or 20 on APS. Well, here's the same chart from our Cerner Siemens thing, and by hospital size. The red up the top are the most expensive, the big ones. The yellow in the middle are the mid-range hospitals, 1 to 300 beds. Well, down the bottom is Healthland's client base. And they're generally under 100 beds. I think Healthland had the leading critical access client base of, gosh, of the 350, I'll bet 300 were critical access. And notice in red ink, not only is Healthland gone, but so is NextGen. Kind of a surprising development. NextGen had bought Opus, a nice EHR out of Texas, and Sphere, Florian Weiland's very nice financials. Tried to enter the hospital market and just gave up. Just a few months ago, they sold it to Quadramed, which was odd. So NextGen is now off the table. Who's competition? Well, besides Evident, which is the new rebranding of CPSI, evidently a much more moving phrase. MedHost is the former HMS out of Nashville, Tennessee. MedHost is a superb ED system, and they merged with HMS, renamed themselves MedHost. On the right, Cerner Community Works. It's kind of amazing how the biggest and most complicated system is also selling to the smaller hospital market. It's basically a shared approach. You and 20, 30 other hospitals share a given Oracle database, and can be inexpensive and can work well if you can get the group to agree with what you want to do. CSS OrMed used to be CSS Health Tech. OrMed's a superb ERP suite, and I think they're looking for a new EHR partner shortly. Prognosis, a well-integrated financial and clinical small vendor, but they're very hot in that small hospital market. And lastly, Razor Insights, recently purchased by Athena Health. Jonathan Bush jumping into the hospital market too. And they're talking about a rewrite of the whole thing to be a single integrated database approach like Epic and Cerner and Meditech and others have done. So lots of things to pick from at this bottom marketplace. It's not just a slam dunk of only having to go to one other vendor. You do have some nice options. Frank?
Some of the strategic issues you want to think about as you look at perhaps alternatives and make this decision as to whether you move ahead with the acquiring vendor or move someplace else. First of all, what are the business issues that are most important to you in your facility? Are you involved in an ACO? Will you be involved in an ACO? Are you getting involved in any population health initiatives in your area? Are you looking at the shift from inpatient to outpatient growth in outpatient care? These are all business issues that you need to take into account and use those as you measure not only the CPSI offerings, but the other alternatives that are out there. Is your facility getting competition from other providers or perhaps retail? Maybe you've got some serious cost of operation challenges. Matter of fact, I was just reading this morning that this year 57 small to mid-sized hospitals closed their doors. And you know, there's a lot going on down in those smaller facilities that make life really tough. And of course, you have all the regulatory issues that I mentioned before, not to repeat them, but one of the newer ones is this LTC PAC bundled payment, what I call it heartburn. About 3 weeks ago, CMS came out with and said that any ACO that's going to do post-acute care and long-term care has to work with a long-term care facility that meets some very strict quality measures. The ACO can only refer patients to PAC type facilities that meet these quality measures, and according to analysis that has been done, that means only 1 in 3 long-term care or PAC facilities will be acceptable to CMS to be part of an ACO. And if your facility is either getting into the ACO world or perhaps you're a combined facility, this is a monster piece of regulation that's tied in with bundle payments and the whole ACO picture that you really should be looking at hard as you evaluate vendors. Vince? Lastly, you may not have a choice. Many of the smaller facilities who are part of or going to be part of an ACO don't have a choice. The big shop is running Epic or Cerner or whoever, and the CIO from the big shop basically steps in and says, we want everybody on the same system, and we don't care what you like or what you don't like, this is what you're going to run. So this decision may be taken away from you, and perhaps that's a better place to be. It remains to be seen. Cerner and Epic have been making some very aggressive moves in the cloud world, if you will, by pricing their smaller hospitals through an ACO in very competitive ways. Epic traditionally, as an example, has virtually no upfront capital costs to put their system in a small hospital through an ACO. Essentially, the price points are you pay per workstation. So if you need 50 workstations or 100 workstations, that's your cost. You don't have to buy a new package or pay a license fee or anything of that sort. So you could find yourself in that situation where the choice is made for you. Vince?
I've updated. This is a graph we did put the last session on Cerner Siemens showing the vendor strength by various application areas. And I added here in this big green rectangle the long-term care world that health tech suddenly put CPSI in. And I just indicated some other vendors. It may surprise you, but Cerner has a fairly powerful power chart. They call it long-term care product. They do sell that market. Meditech has a solution, is the new phrase for products these days. And the old Keen NTT Data, the new name, is extremely powerful in that area. They bought Pentimation 30 years ago out of Maryland, and they have over 1,000 long-term care facilities. So interesting to look at some of your options here if you have a long-term care piece attached to your facility as well as acute care. And I even added in home health care because it gets very tricky. It's kind of amazing how many niches there are. And this kind of gets back to Frank's point of the amount of R&D vendors have to invest to keep up with all these applications. Also in green in the rightmost columns for physician practices, some updates. McKesson has built an integrated physician billing system, call it practice management if you would, registration, scheduling, and billing. It's nicely integrated. They have, I don't know, maybe 1,000 physicians using it today. And they're working on the EHR. Down the next level in the middle there, Allscripts has a very nice integrated Sunrise solution that runs for both the hospital and the physician practices or clinics. Under the old, this is the Eclipsys system called Sunrise. It's not the TouchWorks, which is Allscripts' major product for physician practices. That is just the interface to Sunrise. So if you're considering Allscripts, look at that integrated Sunrise solution versus the interface TouchWorks. And the Meditech, to their great credit, has completed their project to replace the old LSS, which wasn't that good, with a very solid, integrated in the same Release 6 database cache, Neil's version of MUMPS, totally integrated with the hospital piece. So interesting how this unique world of Judy Faulkner's Epic was the only integrated hospital and physician system for 5-10 years. Other vendors are waking up and catching up. Allscripts has been there, just not known as well. Meditech now has it, and Paragon is halfway there. So kind of an interesting and complicated analysis, but that's what the industry is. Frank?
So when should you start looking, perhaps? Some of the factors you need to think about is, first of all, what is the timing on your strategic and operational issues? Those items that we do earlier, do they apply to you, and what is the horizon for dealing with them will drive how fast you move. History shows that acquiring vendor must do a delicate dance of balancing what they call fast client flips against the laggards. What that means is that the stated target dates will change. So if a vendor doesn't want too many flips too soon, because obviously there are resources necessary to support those installations, which he may not have readily available. And on the other hand, he doesn't want them to happen too slow, because for the reasons I gave earlier about generating revenue, ROI, and so on and so forth. So there is a fine line that vendors will walk, either pushing or not pushing you to move ahead. So regardless of what the vendor says the dates are for how long they're going to support a system, what you need to be aware of is in so many words, is calculating on a perhaps quarterly basis what I refer to as the real sunset date, as versus the announced sunset date. The real sunset date you can anticipate and forecast by watching for early warning signs, such as reduced number of new releases, how slow it takes to get fixes or how fast, slowdowns in call response times, late delivery excuses. Oh, we were going to get that release out in February, but for whatever reason, it's not going to happen until May. And if you attend the user group meetings, which I hope you do, listen for more angst at the meetings. And the more and more you hear, that's going to tell you how fast or slower those real dates are coming. And lastly, expect many special deals. If things are moving fairly slow, vendors tend to tell their sales staff, get these people to move sooner than later. So you're going to start hearing things like, get a free interface or get a free module or something, or a free workstation if you sign up this month. So those are the things you need to keep in mind and kind of sense where, how the wind is blowing and when the tide is going to change, if you will, in terms of how you need to respond. Vince?
Well, here's some quotes from the recent CPSI press release. The classic system is going to be quoted for supported for a minimum of 2 years. And the classic is the one that's obviously the oldest and is going to be moved off of the soonest. Centric, the quote is CPSI plans to support and invest in the Centric platform for at least 7 years. But the interesting question is, how do you define that simple little word support? How many bugs do you fix and how fast, and minor versus major? Our releases slow down, as Frank said, to annual, biannual, decade, every other decade. To keep up with the latest from Mr. Gates and Mr. Jobs, sorry he's departed, but you get the message. The third-party vendors constantly make changes, and how many, if you were CPSI, would you do for Classic versus Centric? Regulatory changes are that nasty phrase in most contracts today. Vendors are only committed to do what's commercially feasible, quote unquote, which means what they feel like doing, as opposed to what you want them to do. And how many new features will you see in Centric as opposed to in CPSI? It's kind of interesting. Will CPSI merge Centric with their system, or will they just slowly sunset? It'd be interesting to see over 7 years, but it's the Classic folks that are in a panic mode. From a sales standpoint, if I were Troy Rosser, CPSI's VP of Sales, you'd have 3 territories here, Classic and APS. Jump on them. They got to start looking to thrive next week. And then with Centric, you've got about 3 to 5 years to build a relationship with the executive teams, get in bed with them, write their IT plans. Hospitals are often that naive, let the vendor write it for them. And it's health tech are the lucky folks, and it's going to go the opposite. You'll actually be sold to many of the Thrive is the new name CPSI has for their old, quote, CPSI system, end quote. So time frames depend on which of the aging products you're on. Frank?
So some of the things you can start doing now in anticipating that you're going to make a decision or have to make a decision in 2 years or sooner or later, whatever. Do an inventory of the current use of the current Healthland products, applications, modules. You know, which modules do you really use? What parts of those modules don't you use? What are the likes and the dislikes of the people that use those modules? Are people pleased with it, or are there big problems? Are there significant things missing? Take a look at what your internal technology base is. How old are those workstations you're using? The file servers that you may have. What are their capabilities? What's the reliability? What about your refresh status? You should have had in your IT plan a refresh status. You know, where do you stand with that? If you're running a lot of old rinky-dink IBM XTs or whatever, this is probably a darn good time to get rid of them sooner than later. And the last element is one that most people don't really think about, but this is the time to do it, and that is, what are the unique workflows of your operations and your operating departments today? Will they be supported by the replacement product? Typically what happens is virtually all providers, regardless of the vendor that you're using, have to do all kinds of workarounds to do special things that they do somewhat differently than what perhaps the system will allow. What are those workarounds, and how significant are they? They're probably the places where you're going to be able to save money, particularly labor, by making sure you address those workarounds with whatever the replacement system is, whether it be CPSI system or Athena or whoever you replace with. Are those workarounds going away is a question you ought to be asking. Vince?
Things I'd look into in a review of your current IT situation. One, user satisfaction. Are they tired of this ancient old classic system anyway, and were they, you know, champing at the bit to get on to something more modern? Your cost and staffing levels are very critical. Some critical access hospitals, it's kind of incredible. We worked at one recently, just past year. A single FTE was the IT department, quote unquote, one body, as opposed to the average 100-bed community hospital might have 10, and an IDN might have FTEs in the hundreds. So it's a whole different world, and the number of bodies you have and can afford to have gives you a hint of what kind of system you can go to. And it's rarely looked at in the selection process or, you know, an internal review. It's important. Cost mainly as a percent of your total expense. Hard to say arbitrarily. Frank's throwing out the $1 million figure. Well, $1 million is a lot of money if you're only doing $50 million a year, but if you're doing $100 million a year, it's not bad. And you got to compare yourself to other hospitals of your size and complexity to see how you stand. And then, as Frank pointed out a little bit, the diversity of your application portfolio can be quite stumping. Core HIS vendors are sometimes interfaced themselves under the covers, and then the ancillaries like lab, pharmacy, radiology are often best of breed, especially EDIS systems probably have 400 or 500 MedHost clients. I'll bet many are in Healthland clients. Non-acute care has now been raised with long-term care acquisition and even minor apps, time and attendance, nurse staffing. It's incredible how many dozens, indeed hundreds of applications you might have to look at in your replacement.
I want to come back to this workaround thing. It's one of the big bugaboos I've had as a systems person over the years, as a guy who bought and installed systems, being a CIO, CFO, and actually a guy who actually created and built systems and sold them. I'm well aware of the fact that you can't address everything for every client. My suggestion, again, is identify all workarounds. All legacy systems have them. Sure, Healthland has got of them just like any other vendor. And what I suggest you do is, after you've gotten the list of the workarounds from the various operating departments, you take the top 25 in order of inefficiency or lost revenue or lost payments or regulatory issues, compliance issues, and you rate them based upon those kind of criteria. And then you take those 25 and you make those critical elements of any new system replacement that you're going to go ahead and do, whether it be a CPI one or whether it be an Epic or whatever vendor you choose. You use those 25 as one of your key pieces of evaluation. Vince?
And a couple of do's and don'ts on system selections. We've done over 160 of these things, so we've learned the hard way. Number one, start with a feature checklist. You only get the truth from salesmen. And you send them a question, you're going to get the truth. And it helps we consultants. We have kids to put through college. The more money we spend drawing up these thousands and thousands of features, the more we can afford sending to college. Don't look at the user manuals. They're dull. They're boring. They're online today. They're written by technicians, and they're mainly facts and figures, nouns, verbs. It's the marketing people give you the adjectives and the adverbs you're dying to read, so be careful about that. Another, you got to trust these third parties like Blackboard and Class. They know your unique needs. They know all about your state. Think of the difference between Louisiana, Maine, and Iowa. Your size, critical access versus 100 bedder versus 500 bedders. All their reports break down everything by bed size. And they have a very close relationship with the vendors. They sell thousands of dollars of support, of reports to these vendors, so they know them very well, and they really are a good partner. Don't bother to make reference calls and site visits. It's you spending your time and your money to do that when they've already done it. Gosh. And your users are far too busy to get involved in something that's purely the CIO's decision. I mean, IT picks the vendor. Why bother the poor users? After IT picks it, then you tell them what you picked and you make them do it. Last thing, make it all based on the demos. Demos are everything. A vendor that has the best dudes and dollies is putting in the most money into their product and their R&D and their development. The better they look, the better the system is. Don't bother to talk to the implementation people. They're usually very dull people. It's salesmen that have extroverted, pleasant personalities, funny jokes, nice guys. Implementation people are just frankly boring. Details. They want to get into facts and numbers. Just not as charming as the sales and marketing people. So here's some pretty good hints for you to how to start your selection process.
Some of the other things you need to be looking at. Integration is a big area. What third-party systems will you want to keep? Many of you are running various specialty pieces of software outside of the health plan system. Which of those do you want to keep, and why do you want to keep them? Which obviously then raises a whole series of questions about integration or interface or interoperability, as the buzzword is today. What are some of the alternatives? Does CPSI have an alternative? And can it meet your needs? Obviously, if they do, that hopefully solves the integration question. If not, you got to deal with how will you integrate and what will the cost be, both from the third-party product now to integrate with CPSI and CPSI to them. You clearly want to be considering new third-party tools for integration and interface or interoperability, particularly the FHIR standards that have evolved over the last year or so, which is the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource Standards that HL7 essentially and the other parties have come out with. That's essentially the API interfaces for health records, which essentially requires that the vendor expose their data elements as services, which is very difficult for legacy systems to do. This is something you really want to pay attention to, because if you replace your current health plan systems, as you no doubt will have to, you essentially want to make sure that whoever you're replacing it with is doing something and has a plan, if not in place, to deal with the FHIR standards. And of course, keep in mind, interfaces, integration, interoperability, whatever word you choose to use, has costs coming at it from both sides. There's no such thing as a free interface, as I've learned in 45 years in healthcare, and there's many valid reasons why. Vince?
I'm going to give you some suggestions on contract negotiations. Again, do's and don'ts. The first do is pick a vendor of choice. If it's CPSI, start with that. Why bother to negotiate with the second vendor? It costs you a lot of time and money. If you have another vendor, you'll make CPSI wonder if you really are their partner, if you're really loyal to them, if you're actually talking to Meditech or Paragon or Athena Health or MedHost. You'll lose their trust, and that's a very dangerous thing to do. Second big do is the CPSI, meet with all your nurses, your lab director, your billers. They're going to help you sell this thing internally. The worst thing you want to do is limit the communications. Make the vendor just talk to your CIO or your C-suite. After all, they really want you to thrive. It's why they named the product that way, so they really have your interest at heart. The thing about contract negotiations, leave it totally to your attorneys. The legal gobbledygook can save your life. I mean, indemnification, liability, these clauses are running pages after pages today. They're the important ones, not boring stuff like the cost, system response times, regulatory requirements, payment terms. Technical issues are too simple. It's really the lawyer's Greek and Latin stuff that's important. And too involved in negotiations. I mean, really, what do you care about things like this fire Frank was talking about, or HL7, the latest level, system response times in terms of seconds or minutes or hours, how much experience your implementation people have if they've been with the company longer than a minute or two, limits on travel costs. What's the matter with first class if you're crossing the country? Gosh. And we all have to someday face ICD-11 stage 4. Trust your vendor. Believe me, they're going to take care of it. Don't worry. Frank?
Some of the next steps I would suggest, number one, carefully review your health plan contract now. The sooner you go through it now in detail, the stronger your position is going to be when it's time to negotiate CPSI or whoever. Any clauses you can use as leverage in negotiations, such as assignment. It's a contract assignable. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Notice. How much notice do you have to give before leaving the contract or not renewing the contract? And one of the biggest questions is who owns the data? A lot of, particularly the older contracts that can go back 10, 20 years that have just been renewed time and time again, essentially do not address the whole issue as to who owns the data. That's an area that you really ought to take a long, hard look at, because when push comes to shove, there are situations where vendors have, quote, said, we own the data and you don't get it unless you pay me a ransom. You want to outline important elements of any new vendor contract, the important elements to you that are most important, some of which Vince already touched on. And my third suggestion is it's time to meet Gwynnie. And Gwynnie is get it in writing. Anything that the new vendor says to you, particularly if it's a promise in terms of support, continuity, integration, what have you, get it in writing. Don't just listen to what and accept what the salesperson says. You want to see it in writing. And my last and strongest recommendation is don't let the new vendor drive the process. If you want this change that's been foisted upon you to take you to a better place, then you need to start driving the process now. Vince?
Well, your next steps, it kind of depends on what system you're on and the date of your contract. Now, the guys on Classic and APS, well, you're in a panic mode. You got to start yesterday. Because, boy, 2 years, you figure it takes you a year to do a selection process, contract negotiation, a year to do an implementation. That's exactly when the clock is ticking. So you folks have to start, and as Frank said, take the initiative yourself. You start the process rather than the vendor. Intermediate, if you've got a decent implementation, your clients are reasonably happy, your users are fairly satisfied with the HR, days and they are low, well, you've got time. You can develop a strategic plan. Something hospitals stopped doing with the meaningful use craze a few years ago. Maybe they'll get wise again. It addresses so many things we've addressed in previous slides. Lay down all of your workflows, your integration items, regulatory challenges, potential mergers with other large hospitals. And as support slowly reduces over the next 3 to 5 years, you shift from planning into a selection process. Safest, you look, American Health Tech are there forever. If CPSI builds a strong interface and I were a CPSI client, I'd sure look at it. It may be the best way to go. That interface is different than integration, though, so be careful. Still may pay to conduct a mini search to get a competitor for contract negotiation clout. So, Frank, I think that wraps it up. And Laura, you may want to ask the users for any questions, and Frank and I will make a stab at it.
Okay, great. Thank you. As Vince said, now we'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. As a reminder, please use the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel to submit them. The first question from Tom What do you see as the future for other vendors such as Meditech and MedHost?
Well, I'll jump on that real quick. I don't think they're any fools. They're probably making calls on the Healthland client base already. You can buy that database from HIMSS Analytics and start with 1,000 emails and a couple hundred letters, and the next thing have your salespeople calling. So every other vendor, not only Meditech, MedHost, but every vendor out there, Paragon, Athena Health, they're going to be knocking on doors. It's a very busy time for the Healthline client base, and your challenge is to sort through it all and have an organized process rather than just react to the first and the best salesperson. Frank, how would you say the other vendors are going to react?
That's a wonderful question, and as a guy who was a vendor in that marketplace many years ago, it is not a market that I would want to be in today, and I'll give you the reasons why. One, there's at most 2,500 potential hospital clients. That's probably a slight exaggeration when you consider that a number of those facilities are owned by ACOs or other organizations. So. And now you have 10 vendors out there, whatever the number is, all chasing after 2,500 clients, all of which who have, as I said earlier, mission critical systems installed and have had them installed for many years, which makes it a replacement market. So if you're a vendor in that space, it's a tough world. It's an extremely tough world to thrive. It's a difficult world to survive in. So my prognosis going forward is you're going to see less and less vendors simply because of the size of the marketplace. And I also say that at the higher end too. I'm a firm believer that 5 years from now there will not be 6 major vendors at the high end of the market. There'll be 3. And in the small end of the market, it'll probably be about the same number.
Okay, thanks. Mike is interested in your thoughts about RICAN.
Well, this is Vince. I'll jump in. CPSI has a very strong revenue cycle management division, and RICAN will probably be absorbed into it. I think it represented 30% of CPSI's revenue last year. I think they call it TrueBridge. So RICAN will probably be absorbed very well into it. It's not a technology thing. It's not a product per se as much as people, procedures, approaches. And it's another great reason why CPSI was interested in Healthland. And if you're a client in either one, it's probably good for you. And I think fairly positive for all people involved. Frank, your thoughts?
Essentially, it's a merger of 2 consulting organizations, and the merger of 2 consulting organizations is very different than the merger of 2 technology businesses. So my guess, and as a guy who's been in and out of consulting firms, big, small, and otherwise over the years, is there going to be a fair amount of turnover in terms of people, because typically you can't keep all the consultants happy all the time. I think overall it's because there's a bigger client base, but if I was a person working in one of those firms, I'd be looking over my shoulder.
Okay. Jeff points out that CPSI traditionally sells an all-or-nothing bundle of EHR, RCM, and possibly ERP. He'd like to know how hospitals on Healthland's RCM will look at the need to swap both EHR and RCM when CPSI forces it.
Well, Vince, I'll jump in and start on that. Again, most vendors want to sell it all, so they'll surely push the integrated solution. And to CPSI's credit, they honestly do have a very well integrated solution. It's all in the same COBOL programming language, and it's now an open SQL database. Used to be proprietary database, but they're getting more open about it. And it does make sense to integrate with a vendor like CPSI. They even, this is a shocker, Frank, you may not believe this, they have their own time and attendance and PACS system. CPSI has written. I've never heard of that before. Dairyland, Healthland also had a time and attendance, but not a PACS. So CPSI is as integrated as you can get. It sure makes sense if you're considering them to buy them. And with every other vendor, it gets back to that chart of ours that showed their strengths and weaknesses by app. It's a complicated decision, but generally, hospitals seem to be going much more with integration than best of breed. Would you agree, Frank?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for CPSI to stick their RCM in a facility and let the facility keep the ERP piece. Maybe they get an ERP from Dynamics or Ormed or one of the other Lawson, one of the other firms, and I just there got to be all kinds of incentives, I believe, to get the provider off of those third-party pieces for ERP and keep it all tied up in one nice bundle.
Yeah, I'd say the larger the hospital, the more you have a large internal IT staff that can handle an interface engine. The smaller the hospital, the less. So these small hospitals of Healthland and CPSI, integration is sort of the only logical way to go.
Can you talk about your view of client-server EHR platforms versus cloud-based EHR?
Well, I'll have fun with that. The way to define cloud is it's where a buyer's head is at when they think this is something new and different. And if you folks are old enough to remember shared systems and then remote hosting, and then it was software as a service, and now the latest word is cloud, and it's so much better to have somebody else own all your data, own your servers, and be totally responsible for the survival of your organization. The only way to do it is trust somebody else, never run your own. And I'm being that as a wise guy. The truth is the only really low-cost improvement in IT has been in hardware. Servers today cost a fraction of what mini computers and mainframes used to cost. So why in the name of God we're suddenly not buying our own hardware, but paying a fortune to some vendor every month so that they can make a handsome profit on the few servers they have running for you is beyond me. It's their heads in the cloud.
My reaction to that, Vince, is first of all, and you alluded to it, you need to define cloud. And to me, the pure definition of cloud is the only thing running at the local site is a presentation layer. The data layer, the business logic layer, and so on and so forth are all running back in Paducah or wherever it is, where you've got all your major processing going on. Simple fact of the matter is Healthland has never had a cloud system, and neither does CPSI. What they do, for the most part, is they relocate or co-locate servers in a central facility, and they tell the client that we're running the computer for you. All you got to do is, quote, link through the internet. And the fact of the matter is it was a lot of these vendors, and it isn't just these two. I mean, Epic does this. A lot of the big vendors do this simply because the history of the technology is they use Citrix as the tool to link the local site with the central site, and essentially you're running you're taking what I refer to as a $3,000 computer and using it in the old days at what would have been a $700 dumb terminal via Citrix. To me, that's not cloud. It's a long way from cloud.
Can you talk about which other vendors in the space you see as acquisition targets?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say I was back
growing.
Go ahead, Frank. Elaborate.
I mean, every vendor, first of all, every company is for sale except for a truly private company. If you're a public company, you're for sale every day. I, if I could raise the money, could go out and buy all of the stock for CPSI tomorrow, and they would sell it if I gave them a price that was high enough to satisfy their investors. So CPSI is on the block. Cerner is on the block. You know, McKesson. You name every company except supposedly Epic. But I honestly believe their day will come too. They've been quite successful at holding it off. Every company is for sale. And anybody that denies that, I guess, never took a business or an economics course.
The one point I'd make, Frank, is I give Judy Faulkner a lot of credit for her will she recently signed that keeps Epic private, gives her portion of the company to charity, and prevents her from going public. Hats off. The opposite of the typical billionaire that just wants to make their kids rich, I guess. It's hard to say what. Maybe it's Bill Gates and Melinda. They just want to spend their money on their favorite charities. Judy doesn't. She's keeping the company private, not going to go public, and hats off to her.
Okay, guys, that looks like our last question, so we'll be concluding the webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Frank and Vince, for another interesting and informative presentation. Attendees, watch your email for links to the recording of today's webinar as well as the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. We look forward to seeing you at our next HIS Talk webinar, and I wish you all a great rest of the day.